Number 1. Audrey Elizabeth Hale. On March 27, 2023, 28-year-old Audrey Elizabeth Hale entered the Covenant School, a Presbyterian Church private elementary school in Nashville, Tennessee, and opened fire, murdering 6 people. The victims were 3 9-year-old students, Evelyn Deekhouse, Hallie Scruggs, and William Kinney, and 3 school staff members: 61-year-old Cynthia Peak, 60-year-old Catherine Kwanse, and 61-year-old Mike Hill. Hale was shot and murdered by the police within 14 minutes of the first emergency call. Audrey Hale was a Nashville native, a former student of the Covenant School, and a self-identified transgender male who used the name Aiden on social media and professional accounts. Police confirmed Hale had legally purchased 7 firearms from local stores, 3 of which were used in the shooting. 2 of these weapons were believed to be legally obtained. Authorities stated that Hale had been under medical treatment for an undisclosed emotional disorder. Her parents were unaware that she had acquired multiple firearms and believed she had only sold a firearm they knew about. Police chief stated that she was under doctor's care for an emotional disorder, but no further details about the diagnosis or treatment were made public. On the morning of the attack, Hale sent an Instagram message to a former middle school basketball teammate, Averiana Patton, stating, "I'm planning to go today." The message was time-stamped 9:57 a.m., just minutes before the first shots were fired. Patton alerted police, but the attack had already begun by the time law enforcement could respond. Surveillance footage later released by police showed her arriving at the school in a gray Honda Fit. Dressed in camouflage pants, a white shirt, a tactical vest, and a red cap worn backwards, she approached a side entrance and shot through the glass doors to gain entry. Armed with 3 weapons and carrying over 100 rounds of ammunition, she moved through the hallways, firing at staff she had met on the way. The smoke from the firearm shots triggered the fire alarm. Several staff members and students initiated an evacuation without knowing there was an active shooter. She then went up to the 2nd floor via a stairwell, where he encountered 2 children in a line on the top of the stairwell, as well as a substitute teacher and other children near the entrance of the stairwell. He fired his firearm several times, fatally shooting 3 children and the substitute teacher. Most of the evacuating students and staff escaped unharmed. Some students and teachers went back to their classrooms and barricaded themselves. Hale then walked up to more victims and fired more shots into them as he walked to the 2nd floor hallway. On the 2nd floor, she walked up to a nearby classroom door and fired until the magazine was empty. She then reloaded and fired at an adjacent classroom door until the reloaded magazine was empty. She injured 1 student with flying debris in the 2nd classroom. She then again stopped shooting and reloaded as he continued searching for potential victims in the 2nd floor hallway. Hearing the fire alarms go off, the head of the school exited the school office on the 2nd floor, unaware that an active shooter incident was happening. Hale rounded the corner from the church offices into the same hallway the headmaster was in. The headmaster asked Hale what she was doing. She responded by shooting her multiple times with one of his firearms, then walking up to her and shooting her once more with another firearm. At this point, she spent the next 3 minutes walking around searching for potential victims in the rooms near the headmaster's body. After failing to find any victims, she went back to the church offices to search the rooms, but did not find any victims there. After a while, she gave up searching rooms and went downstairs to the 1st floor again. While approaching the doors to the church sanctuary, she opened fire at 2 television sets. She then turned towards the double doors leading to the pre-K and kindergarten classrooms and opened fire through the doors without shooting anyone. She walked upstairs to the 2nd floor and entered the emptied-out church sanctuary, where she fired 7 times at a stained glass window depicting Adam and Eve before leaving. She then walked by a window at the church vestibule and noticed police cars arriving. She fired at the officers outside through the window for over 2 minutes. She did not hit any police officers but disabled 2 police vehicles. When police arrived at the scene, a teacher told an officer that the students were in lockdown and 2 were missing. Officers then entered the building. While clearing the first floor of students and staff, they heard gunshots coming from the second floor. Officers stepped over a victim on the second floor as they made their way to Hale. After a while, a 5-member team approached Hale and 2 officers fired 4 times each, shooting her down and confirming her death. After 14 minutes of the initial 911 call was made, the threat was neutralized. According to an autopsy report, the Hale was shot 4 times, once in the head, once in the torso, once in the left arm, and once in the right thigh. An investigative report conducted by the Metro Nashville Police Department concluded that Hale had fired 152 times during the attack, 126 times from her AR pistol, 25 from his carbine, and once from his pistol. She was also found with 272 live rounds on him at the time of her death. A search of her home, where she lived with her parents, uncovered more weapons, including a sawed-off shotgun, another firearm, and a manifesto. The writings included detailed maps of the school and plans for other locations. Police said Hale had considered attacking another target but decided against it due to its higher level of security. Chief Drake stated that they have a manifesto and some writings as well as a map drawn out of how her operation was all going to take place. Investigators stated Hale had resentment toward the Covenant School, possibly linked to her time there as a child. Police did not confirm a definitive motive, but said her past connection to the school likely played a role in her selection of the target. The victims appeared to be chosen at random once inside the building. As part of the investigation, the FBI assisted with the analysis of Hale's digital footprint. Her social media accounts and digital files revealed disturbing themes, including violent artwork and a fascination with mass shootings. On her website and LinkedIn profile, Hale described herself as a graphic designer and illustrator. Her work included eerie and violent imagery, including references to horror films like The Shining. One piece was captioned, "To be a kid forever and ever." Hale's family, including her mother Norma Hale, an outspoken advocate for firearm control, expressed shock and sorrow. The Hale family requested privacy and did not publicly comment further on the writings or motivations behind the attack. Because Hale was murdered at the scene by police, no trial or legal proceedings followed. There was no opportunity for defense or prosecution. The manifesto and investigation findings were reviewed internally by law enforcement and intelligence agencies, but the full contents of the manifesto have not been publicly released as of May 2025. Debates continue regarding whether or not to publish its contents. As of May 2025, Audrey Hale has served no years in prison, having died on the day of the shooting. Number 2. Jaylen Fruberg. Jaylen Fruberg was 15 years old at the time of the shooting at Marysville-Pilchuck High School in Washington. He was a freshman, a member of the Tulalip Native American tribe, and had recently been crowned homecoming prince. Fruberg was a football and wrestling team member and was described by peers as popular and outgoing. He had also been recently suspended following a physical altercation on the football field, reportedly provoked by racist comment. Despite his public image, Fruberg had shown signs of emotional turmoil on social media, including a series of troubling tweets hinting at heartbreak and mental distress. Classmates and friends later shared that he had shown signs of emotional distress, particularly in relation to romantic rejection and family tensions involving a girl who was dating his cousin. On the morning of the 24th of October, 2014, Jaylen invited a group of friends and some close relatives to meet him for lunch via text message. He urged some of the students to skip their classes to be with him at lunch. Among them were Andrew Fruberg and Nate Hatch, his cousins and 3 classmates, Shaylee Chuckle-Nasket, Gia Soriano, and Zoe Galasso. Minutes before he carried out the shooting, he reportedly sent a group text message to his family and the families of his would-be victims. In it, he apologized for his actions and laid out plans for his funeral, indicating that he had premeditated the event. At approximately 10:39 a.m., Fruberg entered the school cafeteria, where the invited group was seated at a table. Witnesses reported that he walked up calmly, exchanged brief words, and then produced a Storm firearm legally owned by his father. He began firing without warning, targeting only those at that table. Each victim was shot once in the head. Eyewitnesses described that he carried out the shooting in a calm, methodical way and having a blank stare, and stared at the victims as he shot them. He also appeared to be targeting only the table where his friends were sitting. At the time of the shooting, 7 students were seated at that table. All victims were shot. 14-year-old Zoe Galasso was pronounced dead at the scene. Andrew Fruberg, Nate Hatch, Shaylee Chuckle-Nasket, and Gia Soriano sustained critical head injuries. Students fled in panic. According to multiple reports, he then attempted to reload. At that moment, first-year social studies teacher Megan Silberberger ran into the cafeteria after hearing the shots. She made an attempt to intervene and grabbed at Fruberg's arm. Though some early reports credited her with stopping him, official statements later clarified she did not make physical contact before the final shot. Nonetheless, her approach likely disrupted his plan, as Fruberg immediately turned the gun on himself and fired a fatal shot to his head. The entire incident lasted less than 2 minutes. From 10:39 to 10:41 a.m., the first 911 call was placed by student Eric Cervantes, and the school resource officer arrived within 1 minute of the call. He confirmed 5 students were down and that the shooter was deceased. By 11 a.m., a full SWAT team and paramedics were on site. Of the injured, Gia Soriano died 2 days later on the 26th of October, and Shaylee Chuckle-Nasket died on the 31st of October. Andrew Fruberg succumbed to his injuries on the 7th of November. Nate Hatch, the only survivor, was shot in the jaw and later recovered. In total, over 5 people died from the attack, including the shooter. Investigators combed through over 2,000 pages of interviews, social media content, and evidence to understand Fruberg's motive. While a full psychological profile was never completed due to his death, many classmates, relatives, and friends cited an emotional breakdown over a girl, reportedly in a relationship with his cousin Andrew Fruberg. A month before the shooting, Jaylen tweeted his anger about the girl and disowned Andrew online. His final tweets the night before the shooting read, "It won't last. It'll never last." The shooting left the community of Marysville in mourning. Candlelight vigils were held at local churches, and the cafeteria where the incident occurred was permanently closed, later demolished, and turned into a grassy lawn. The school canceled all activities for a week and brought in more than 15 counselors upon reopening. On the 30th of October, 2014, a memorial service was held for Jaylen Fruberg at the Tulalip Indian Reservation, attended by hundreds, including tribal leaders. It was a deeply conflicted moment for the community, as the victims and the shooter were all members of the same close-knit Native American tribe. The firearm used in the shooting belonged to Jaylen's father and had been stored legally. However, in July 2015, the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives concluded that the father, Raymond Fruberg, was legally prohibited from owning firearms due to a permanent protection order issued against him in 2002 following a domestic violence complaint. Despite this, he passed a federal background check and purchased several firearms. In 2016, Raymond Fruberg was found guilty of 6 counts of illegal firearm possession and sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison. There was no legal trial for Jaylen Fruberg due to his death at the scene. No final statements were made by him, aside from the texts and tweets he posted in the days leading up to the shooting. As of March 2025, Jaylen Fruberg remains deceased. He died on the 24th of October, 2014, at age 15, from a self-inflicted wound to the head at Marysville Pilchuck High School. He never served prison time. Number 3. Elliot Rodger. Elliot Oliver Robertson Rodger was a 20-year-old student residing in Isla Vista, a coastal community adjacent to the University of California, Santa Barbara. He was enrolled part-time at Santa Barbara City College and was known to live alone in an apartment on Seville Road. Rodger was the son of Peter Rodger, a film industry professional who worked as an assistant director on The Hunger Games. Despite being born into a privileged background with access to therapy, luxury, and travel, Elliot Rodger experienced prolonged periods of social isolation and psychological distress. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome as a child, he had difficulty forming meaningful connections and harbored deep resentment toward women and socially successful men. On the evening of May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger began what he termed his day of retribution. The attack started at approximately 9:30 p.m. inside his Isla Vista apartment, where he stabbed to death 3 men, Cheng Yuan Hong, George Chen, and Weihan Wang. The victims were his roommates or had recently been invited to the apartment. Authorities later found their bodies with multiple stab wounds, believed to have been inflicted hours before the next phase of the rampage began. Rodger then drove his black BMW coupe toward the Alpha Phi sorority house, carrying 3 legally purchased semi-automatic firearms and more than 400 rounds of ammunition. He knocked on the sorority's door, but no one answered. Frustrated, he opened fire on 3 women standing outside. 22-year-old Katie Cooper and 19-year-old Veronica Weiss were killed. The 3rd woman survived but was seriously wounded. Immediately afterward, Rodger drove to the nearby IV Deli Mart, where he entered and fatally shot 20-year-old Christopher Michael Martinez, a UCSB student. Surveillance footage showed customers taking cover as he fired indiscriminately. Continuing his spree, Rodger drove through the streets of Isla Vista, shooting at pedestrians, exchanging fire with the sheriff's deputy, and even hitting at least 2 cyclists with his vehicle. He wounded a total of 13 people during this drive-by assault, some by firing shots, and others were struck by his car. At several points, law enforcement officers returned fire. Rodger was struck in the left hip but remained mobile. His rampage ended when he crashed his BMW after colliding with a cyclist. Officers who approached the vehicle found Rodger dead in the driver's seat from a self-inflicted wound to the head. Inside the vehicle, investigators recovered the 3 firearms, all of which were registered in Rodger's name, and a large supply of unused ammunition. The stabbings at the apartment and the drive-by shootings across Isla Vista formed a total of 10 separate crime scenes. In the weeks and months before the attack, Rodger had posted several disturbing videos on YouTube and authored a 140-page manifesto titled My Twisted World. In the document and accompanying videos, he expressed deep resentment toward women, romantic rejection, and what he saw as society's unfair treatment of him. In one of the videos titled Elliot Rodger's Retribution, where he expressed anger over his virginity, social isolation, and proclaimed himself superior to others, he said, "I'm 22 years old and I'm still a virgin. I've never even kissed a girl. You girls have never been attracted to me. But I will punish you all for it." Rodger also wrote extensively about his desire to carry out violent retribution against both women and men who he believed were sexually active and socially superior. He claimed he would annihilate women and wrote about fantasies of placing them in concentration camps. He referred to himself as the Supreme Gentleman and spoke of being a god who deserved power and sexual attention. His online history showed that he had been active on misogynistic forums such as puahate.com, a site where men discussed their frustrations with dating and women in bitter, often violent terms. Posts on that forum and in his manifesto demonstrated his hatred not only of women but also of men he viewed as more sexually successful. Authorities revealed that law enforcement had been contacted about Rodger multiple times before the incident. On the 30th of April, 2014, deputies conducted a welfare check after a family member, likely his mother, expressed concern about his mental state. During the visit, Rodger was described by officers as polite and shy. He convinced them he was merely socially struggling and planned to drop out of college. No search was conducted at the time, and he was not detained. This failure later raised questions about whether more proactive intervention could have prevented the massacre. Santa Barbara County Sheriff Bill Brown confirmed that the officer's interaction with Rodger in April was under review. Before that, in July 2013, Rodger was also involved in a minor assault case, and in January 2014, he accused a roommate of stealing candles and executed a citizen's arrest. Rodger left no survivors to prosecute. Because he died by hurting himself at the end of the attack, no legal charges were filed. There was no trial, sentencing, or formal conviction. However, the crime spurred a national conversation in the United States about firearm control, mental health, and misogyny-fueled violence. His father, Peter Rodger, publicly expressed anguish and sympathy for the victims. Rodger's manifesto had also revealed a disturbing desire to murder his younger half-brother. These fantasies painted a portrait of an individual whose delusions extended far beyond ordinary social rejection. As of July 2025, Elliot Rodger remains deceased. He was never arrested, convicted, or incarcerated, and no prison term was served. In total, 7 people died from the attack, 3 by the knife attack, and 4 by firearm shots. Also, 14 people were severely injured. Number 4. Salvadore Ramos. On May 24, 2022, 18-year-old Salvadore Ramos committed one of the deadliest school shootings in United States history at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Before the attack, Ramos had been living with his grandparents. He was unemployed, had dropped out of high school, and was known to spend most of his time alone at home or online. In the weeks leading up to the incident, he had been exchanging messages with a 15-year-old girl in Germany whom he met online. During their chats on social media and FaceTime, he mentioned acquiring ammunition and made vague threats about future violence. The girl later testified that Ramos seemed withdrawn, isolated, and emotionally unstable. On the morning of May 24, Ramos messaged her that he loved her and then announced he had just shot his grandmother. Moments later, he added that he planned to shoot up an elementary school, and the girl replied, "Cool." That morning, at their home in Uvalde, Ramos and his 6-year-old grandmother, Celia Gonzalez, had an argument regarding his failure to graduate from high school. During the argument, he shot her in the face with a .223 caliber rifle. She managed to escape the house and seek help from neighbors, and was later airlifted to a hospital in San Antonio in critical condition. Ramos then took her black Ford F-150 and drove towards Robb Elementary School. At approximately 11:28 a.m., he crashed his grandmother's truck through a barricade and into a concrete ditch and proceeded to scale a fence and enter the school grounds. According to police, he wore a tactical vest for carrying ammunition plus a backpack and all black clothing, while carrying a rifle and 730-round magazines. He brought into the school only one of the 2 rifles that he had legally bought, and left the other in the crashed truck. A witness said he first fired at 2 people at a nearby funeral home, both of whom escaped uninjured. Police reported receiving 911 calls about a vehicle having crashed near the school. After hearing of the 911 call, a school resource officer drove to the school's campus and pursued a teacher whom the officer erroneously believed to be the gunman, driving past the actual gunman in the process. Ramos entered the school through its west-facing entrance door, which had been shut by a teacher who had seen him. The entrance door did not lock despite being designed to be locked when shut. The police chief estimated that the shooting began at 11:32 a.m. According to a Facebook post by the school was placed in lockdown at 11:43 a.m. in response to gunshots heard in the vicinity. At 11:40 a.m., a teacher in room 102 reached a 911 dispatcher after having tried unsuccessfully to reach them on 3 occasions. The teacher told the dispatcher that she could hear gunshots in a nearby classroom. A report released on July 6 found that an officer had aimed his rifle at Ramos before he entered the school, but did not fire because he was awaiting his supervisor's permission. After entering the building, Ramos walked down 2 short hallways and then entered a classroom that was internally connected to another classroom. All of the fatalities took place in these adjoining classrooms, 111 and 112. A survivor of the shooting said that, as teacher Irma Garcia attempted to lock the door to the classroom, he shot the door's window, then backed Garcia into the classroom and said, "Good night," as he shot and murdered her. Another survivor recounted that he said, "You're all going down," after entering the classroom. He then opened fire on the rest of the students and another teacher in the room. According to a surviving student, Ramos played sad music during the massacre. After he murdered his first set of victims, he scooped up their blood and wrote LOL on the chalkboard. Most of the shooting occurred inside the building within the first few minutes. Ramos was inside the classroom for over an hour, while armed police remained outside the classroom and building. Several children pretended to be dead in order to survive while the shooting took place, including one student, 11-year-old Maya Cirillo, who smeared herself with the blood of one of her dead classmates to appear correctly dead. According to a student who hid in the adjoining classroom, Ramos came in and slightly crouched down, saying, "It's time to be dead," before opening fire. Afterward, a responding officer called out and shouted, "Yell if you need help." A girl in the adjoining classroom said, "Help." Ramos heard the girl, entered the classroom, and shot her. A student said that the officer then barged into the classroom, and Ramos fired at the officer, causing more officers to return fire. Arnulfo Reyes, a teacher in classroom 111 who received multiple gunshot wounds, recalled that he instructed his students to get under the table and act like you're asleep. Ramos then arrived and shot him before firing indiscriminately around classroom 111. Reyes said he didn't hear talk for a while, but later on Ramos unleashed a second round of gunfire at students, and Reyes said if he didn't get them the first time, he got them the second time. All 11 students in classroom 111 during the shooting died. Reyes pretended to be unconscious on the floor, but Ramos then shot him again. According to Reyes, he heard law enforcement approach his classroom from what sounded like the hallway 3 times, but they did not enter. During one of these occasions, he heard a student from the adjoining classroom 112 saying, "Officer, we're in here. We're in here." As law enforcement had already left, Reyes said Ramos walked over there, and he shot again. Reyes later heard law enforcement telling Ramos to come out of the classroom to talk, saying they did not want to hurt anyone. Separately, Reyes said in past security checks, the classroom 111 door that was meant to be locked during lessons remained unlocked because the latch was stuck, and that he had told the principal about this issue. A male student in classroom 109 said that around 15 minutes after the shooting began, the gunman approached classroom 109's door and pulled its handle, but his teacher had jammed the door after hearing gunfire. The gunman shot through the door's glass window, striking another student and a fourth-grade teacher in classroom 109, then left. With a Texas official stating that the gunman had briefly returned into the hallway after entering classrooms 111 and 112. Officers arrived 3 minutes after Ramos entered the school and approached rooms 111 and 112. But they retreated after Ramos fired at them, injuring 2 officers with grazing wounds to the head. Officers were not successful in establishing negotiations. Despite numerous 911 calls from children inside the classroom, officers waited over an hour to confront the shooter. Parents outside pleaded with officers to enter the building. Some attempted to rush into the school and were detained or physically restrained by police. One mother who was handcuffed escaped, jumped a fence, and successfully retrieved her children. Another officer whose daughter had been murdered in the attack was held back by fellow officers as he tried to reach her. Eventually, at around 12:50 p.m., a U.S. Border Patrol tactical unit team entered the classroom using a master key. Ramos opened fire from a closet, but agents returned fire and shot him dead. By that time, Ramos had murdered 21 people, 19 children and 2 teachers, and injured 17 others. He was declared dead at the scene. No trial, sentencing, or imprisonment occurred, as Ramos was murdered during the law enforcement response. In the aftermath of the shooting, public attention turned to the failures in police response, the ease with which Ramos had legally obtained 2 AR-15-style rifles and hundreds of rounds of ammunition days after his 18th birthday, and the vulnerabilities in school security. Lawmakers and victims' families advocated for raising the minimum age for purchasing semi-automatic rifles from 18 to 21. Although proposed legislation received emotional testimony from grieving parents, it was met with strong resistance in the Texas legislature. The National Rifle Association and several Republican officials opposed such measures, arguing that they would infringe upon the rights of law-abiding young adults. Salvadore Ramos left no formal manifesto, note, or public statement beyond his private messages and social media posts. His online behavior revealed a growing interest in violence. He had posted images of firearms and ammunition, and in one exchange, told a stranger he had a little secret. One Instagram user reported that Ramos tagged her in photos of rifles and messaged her saying she should be grateful. His behavior toward animals and previous admission of throwing dead cats at people's homes were cited later as early signs of disturbing behavior. The German girl he had communicated with faced trial in Frankfurt for failing to report the planned crime. She was issued a warning and required to undergo educational counseling. Meta, the parent company of Facebook, stated that Ramos's messages were private and only discovered after the shooting occurred. As of July 2025, Salvadore Ramos remains deceased. He never stood trial, never served prison time, and no prison facility was assigned. In total, 22 people were confirmed dead, including Ramos. He was 18 years old at the time of the crime and was murdered on the same day during the law enforcement response inside Robb Elementary School. Number 5. Ethan Crumbley. On the 30th of November 2021, 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley opened fire at Oxford High School in Michigan, murdering 4 students and wounding 7 others. His father, James Crumbley, was later arrested and charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for his role in enabling the attack. Prosecutors allege that James, then 45 years old, bought the firearm used in the shooting and failed to secure it or respond appropriately to his son's disturbing behavior in the days leading up to the crime. 4 days before the attack, on the 26th of November, 2021, James Crumbley took his son Ethan to Acme Shooting Goods, where he purchased a 9mm Sig Sauer SP firearm. Surveillance footage and purchase records confirmed this transaction. Ethan posted on Instagram that same day that he just got his new beauty today, referencing the firearm. The next day, Ethan's mother, Jennifer Crumbley, posted about their outing, captioning her Instagram post as "Mom and Sunday testing out his new Xmas present." 2 days later, on the 29th of November, a teacher at Oxford High School observed Ethan searching online for ammunition during class. School officials contacted Jennifer, who later texted her son, "Lol, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught." There was no follow-up by the parents or retrieval of the firearm after this warning sign. On the morning of the shooting, the 30th of November, another teacher found a disturbing note on Ethan's desk. It included drawings of a firearm, a bullet, a person bleeding, and phrases such as "the thoughts won't stop," "blood everywhere," and other self-condemnation phrases. The school immediately called in James and Jennifer Crumbley for an emergency meeting. Ethan told school staff the drawings were part of a video game idea and the parents refused to take him home. They did not ask about the location of the firearm, nor did they check his backpack. The meeting ended with Ethan returning to class. At 12:51 p.m. that day, surveillance footage showed Ethan Robert Crumbley entering a bathroom and exiting it about a minute later, holding a semi-automatic firearm. Immediately afterwards, he started firing in the hallway as hundreds of students passed through, transitioning from one class to another. When the students began fleeing, he methodically and deliberately walked down the hallway and shot into classrooms and at anyone who was unable to escape until he moved on toward another classroom. Due to the quick response by students and staff, Crumbley was unable to actually enter any of the classrooms. According to students, a voice over the intercom alerted them to an active shooter, and their teachers started locking and barricading doors and covering windows, convincing them it was not a drill. Others recounted hearing loud, banging sounds before they realized the noises were gunshots and quickly locked the door. One student who hid in a toilet stall recalled hearing a firearm being cocked outside the bathroom. Once the school had been secured, he opened the bathroom door to find several bodies lying on the floor. At 12:51 p.m., police received the first of approximately 100 911 calls about the shooting and headed to the school. Within 2 or 3 minutes of first responder arrival on the scene, Crumbley was arrested, unharmed, by a deputy assigned as a school resource officer and a second deputy. He allegedly still had 7 rounds of ammunition loaded into his firearm and 2 15-round magazines. The entire shooting lasted about 5 minutes and occurred at the southern end of the school building. A total of 32 spent bullet casings were found at the school. Immediately afterwards, the school went into lockdown. Some students were evacuated to a nearby store, and one woman helped shelter children in her house. Authorities conducted 3 sweeps of the building in search of victims and evidence. At least one student posted a video to social media showing people hiding in a classroom while someone out in the hallway spoke to them, claiming to be law enforcement. Those locked down in the classroom mistakenly believed the speaker was the shooter. They ultimately fled through the windows, and from there, a deputy led them to safety. The sheriff confirmed that based on surveillance footage, Crumbley had never knocked on a door, and the person speaking from the hall was likely a detective trying to calm the students. Crumbley murdered 4 students: 16-year-old Tate Meyer, 17-year-old Madison Baldwin, 14-year-old Hannah Street, Juliana, and 17-year-old Justin Schilling, and injured 7 others. Approximately 30 minutes after the shooting began, Jennifer Crumbley texted her son, "Ethan, don't do it." At 1:37 p.m., James called 911 to report the firearm missing from his unlocked bedroom drawer and said he believed his son might be the shooter. On the 3rd of December, 2021, Oakland County prosecutor charged James and Jennifer Crumbley, each with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that the parents' gross negligence directly contributed to the deaths. They highlighted how the gun was stored in an unlocked drawer, how the parents ignored warning signs, and how they failed to secure the weapon after disturbing behavior was noted. After charges were announced, the Crumbleys failed to appear for their arraignment and became the subject of a manhunt. Law enforcement reported that the couple had withdrawn $4,000 from an ATM and were later found hiding in a Detroit warehouse. The U.S. Marshals placed a $10,000 bounty for information leading to their arrest. They were captured on the 4th of December, 2021 and taken into custody. During James Crumbley's trial, the prosecution presented evidence of text messages, surveillance footage, and expert testimony regarding safe firearm storage. They argued that James should have secured the gun and taken Ethan's mental health signs seriously. The defense claimed that James had no way of knowing his son would carry out the shooting and argued that he believed the gun was inaccessible to Ethan. On December 8, 2023, Ethan was formally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus additional consecutive prison time with no parole eligibility. Also in February 2024, James Crumbley was found guilty on all 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. During sentencing in March 2024, the judge cited a pattern of disregard for safety and clear signs of risk. He was sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. His projected earliest release date would be in 2034, depending on parole, and his son will spend the rest of his life in prison, having served just 1 year and 8 months in prison. Number 6. Jesse Osborne. On the 28th of September, 2016, 14-year-old Jesse Osborne carried out a deadly shooting at Townville Elementary School in South Carolina after murdering his own father at their family home. The attack resulted in the death of 6-year-old Jacob Hall and injuries to 2 others. The incident began shortly before 1:45 p.m. that day. Jesse Osborne fatally shot his father, 7-year-old Jeffrey Osborne, 3 times in the head at their Anderson County home. He then stole his father's black pickup truck and drove approximately 3.5 miles to Townville Elementary School, where he had previously been a student. Witnesses stated that Osborne crashed the truck through the school's chain-link fence and exited the vehicle near the playground. Armed with a .40 caliber pistol, he began firing into the air while shouting that he hated his life. He then jumped the fence and started shooting toward a group of first graders who were playing outside during a class birthday celebration. 3 people were struck by bullets, a teacher who was hit in the shoulder, a student shot in the foot, and 6-year-old Jacob Hall, who was shot in the leg. Jacob's wound caused severe blood loss, leading to cardiac arrest. He was airlifted to Greenville Memorial Hospital and underwent surgery, but died from his injuries 3 days later on the 1st of October, 2016. The shooting lasted only 12 seconds. Osborne's gun jammed shortly after he opened fire, preventing further injuries. A volunteer firefighter who had responded to the school quickly subdued and detained him until law enforcement arrived. He was arrested without further incident. Following his arrest, Osborne confessed to both the school shooting and his father's murder. He told investigators that after the shooting, he discarded his gun and bulletproof vest and called his grandparents in tears, saying he was going to hell. His grandmother, prompted by an unintelligible call, went to the family home and found Jeffrey Osborne's body. Jesse later admitted to being influenced by violent online communities and had expressed a desire to become one of the most notorious school shooters in the United States. Investigators uncovered social media messages and search history showing that Osborne had planned the attack for months. He had been expelled from West Oak Middle School earlier in the year for bringing a machete and a hatchet to school. Osborne told a deputy at the time, "I'm going to do Columbine better." In one Instagram group chat, Osborne wrote, "I think I'll most likely murder around 50 or 60, and in another message said, "I have to bet Adam Lanza," referring to the Sandy Hook shooter. During court proceedings, prosecutors highlighted the extent of premeditation and his ongoing obsession with mass violence. FBI Special Agent Shandell Ewing testified about thousands of messages Osborne had sent discussing the best locations and timing for his attack and his desire to avoid police presence by targeting an elementary school instead of a middle school. Jesse Osborne initially pleaded not guilty in September 2018, but later changed his plea. On the 12th of December 2018, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder, waiving his right to a jury trial. Sentencing was postponed to allow the court to consider the details and potential for rehabilitation. During the sentencing hearing in November 2019, the court heard emotional statements from survivors, family members of Jacob Hall, Osborne's relatives, and psychiatric experts. Osborne's grandfather testified that Jesse had been abused at home by his father and bullied at school. He claimed Jesse became isolated after being expelled and spent over 12 hours a day alone in a basement bedroom. Despite this testimony, the prosecution presented evidence that Jesse showed little to no remorse, and a court-appointed psychiatrist stated that he displayed signs of conduct disorder and potential antisocial personality disorder. The psychiatrist also testified that Osborne continued to fantasize about violence, recounting disturbing behaviors such as shooting animals and describing killings as not what he expected. The psychiatrist stated that he does not feel any remorse. He doesn't feel guilt and expressed pessimism about Osborne's ability to be rehabilitated. Judge Lawton McIntosh sentenced Jesse to life in prison without parole for the murder of Jacob Hall, along with an additional 30 years for the attempted murder charges. In September 2023, his sentence was modified on appeal to 2 75-year terms in place of the life sentence, though his release remains unlikely. He was initially incarcerated at Kirkland Correctional Institution, then transferred to Turbeville Correctional Institution in January 2020. He was later moved to Lieber Correctional Institution in September 2020 and returned to Kirkland in January 2024. As of May 2025, Jesse Osborne has served 5 years and 6 months in an adult prison. He was 14 years old at the time of the crime and will be 89 years old when first eligible for release if he serves the full 75-year sentence. His current status is incarcerated at a South Carolina Department of Corrections facility. Number 7. Nikolas Jacob Cruz. On the 14th of February 2018, 19-year-old Nikolas Cruz committed one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. He opened fire at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, killing 17 people, including 14 students and 3 staff members, and wounding 17 others. Cruz was dropped off at the school by an Uber driver at 2:19 p.m., 20 minutes before the school dismissal time. According to a police report, he was carrying a rifle case and a backpack, and multiple magazines were concealed. He was spotted and recognized by a campus monitor who radioed a colleague that he was walking purposefully toward Building 12. The campus monitor did not declare a code red lockdown and sent a radio message to a colleague inside Building 12, which Cruz had entered. The school's policies did not specify clearly who could order a lockdown, and staff had been trained not to order a lockdown unless they saw a firearm or heard shots being fired. Cruz entered Building 12, a three-story structure containing 30 classrooms typically occupied by about 900 students and 30 teachers, at approximately 2:21 p.m. Upon entering the building, he rapidly assembled his weapon at the base of a stairwell adjacent to the first-floor classrooms. As he did so, he was interrupted by a student named Christopher McKenna, and warned him, telling him to better get out of the environment, stating that something bad was about to happen. McKenna fled the building and notified staff members of the unfolding threat. He then entered the first-floor hallway, where he observed three students, Martin Anguiano, Gina Montalto, and Luke Hoyer, who were in the hallway outside room 1215. He shot and murdered all three in the hallway with another student within the hallway, 15-year-old Ashley Baez, wounded once in her upper leg. He then fired through the windows of 4 closed classroom doors, murdering 6 more students and wounding 13 others. 2 staff members were also killed on the first floor of the building. Due to firearm sounds within the hallways, the fire alarm within the building activated, causing confusion because there had been a fire drill earlier in the day. Students were unable to seek shelter at hard corners areas of a classroom that people could safely hide in if a gunman peered through the window of a door, because many of the classrooms in Building 12 lacked one, and furniture otherwise obstructed potential safe spaces. As the shooting unfolded, a code red was still not called due to confusion among school employees over who had the authority to do so. At about 2:21 p.m., a staff member eventually activated a lockdown, but only after discovering the body of a victim and hearing gunfire. An armed school resource officer of the Broward County Sheriff's Office was on campus when the shooting broke out, and he remained outside between Building 12 and the adjacent Building 7. After murdering 2 staff members near the first-floor stairwell, he proceeded to the second floor, where he fired into 2 empty classrooms. On the third floor, he shot and murdered 5 students and another staff member, who all had been stranded in the hallway. 3 other students and 2 teachers were injured. Next, he went into a teacher's lounge, where he attempted to shoot out the hurricane-resistant windows facing the yard in order to target students and staff fleeing below, but failed. After he stopped shooting, possibly due to a weapon malfunction, he dropped his rifle on the 3rd floor of the building and left the scene by blending in with fleeing students. He then walked to a fast food restaurant, stopping at a mall to get a soda on the way, and lingered and stalled around before leaving on foot at 3:01 p.m. Of the 17 fatalities, 14 were students while 3 were teachers. 2 of those murdered were students in Ivy Seamus's Holocaust history class. Seamus was teaching a class lesson on combating hate when Cruz fired shots into her classroom. 4 students from Seamus's class were injured. According to Seamus, Cruz was unaware he was shooting into a class on the Holocaust, even though he had scrawled swastikas onto the ammunition magazines that he left at the school. In total, Cruz fired 139 shots during the shooting, 70 on the first floor, 2-inch the stairwell, 6 on the second floor, and 61 on the third floor. At about 3:41 p.m., police stopped Cruz 2 miles from the school in the neighborhood of Coral Springs and arrested him as the suspected shooter. He was then taken to a hospital emergency room with labored breathing. After 40 minutes, he was released back into police custody and booked into the Broward County Jail. The shooting lasted for about 6 minutes in total, and all of the victims were shot within just under 4 minutes. School surveillance camera video showed Cruz as the shooter, and he was also recognized by eyewitnesses. While SWAT paramedics were inside the building, additional paramedics from the local fire rescue department repeatedly asked to enter the building. These requests were denied by the Broward Sheriff's Office even after the suspect was arrested. The shooting resulted in 17 deaths and 17 injuries. Victims included both students and faculty, such as teacher Scott Bagel, who was shot and murdered while helping students shelter, and student Peter Wang, who held a door open for others to escape. Survivors such as Anthony Borges sustained multiple gunshot wounds and later criticized authorities for their inability in the handling of the threat. A close investigation revealed that Nikolas Cruz had a documented history of behavioral issues and mental health challenges. Adopted as an infant, he lost both adoptive parents by age 18. Following his expulsion from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2017 for disciplinary reasons, he lived with friends and worked part-time. Despite numerous warning signs, including threats made online and reports to law enforcement and the FBI, no preventative action was successfully taken. Cruz legally purchased the weapon used in the shooting in 2017, having passed a background check. Prosecutors argued Cruz was motivated by revenge for perceived social rejection, resentment, and a desire to inflict harm on a date he had chosen, which coincided with Valentine's Day. His notebook and social media contained hateful views, including racist, anti-Semitic, and misogynistic messages. He had a history of mental health issues, disciplinary problems, and behavioral warnings stretching back to school and community authorities, including concerns about threats, armaments, and self-harm. Multiple agencies, including the FBI, received tips about him before the shooting that were not properly followed up. Cruz pleaded guilty on the 20th of October, 2021, to 17 counts of premeditated first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder. He publicly apologized during the plea entry. The prosecution sought the death penalty. During the penalty phase trial that began the 18th of July, 2022, the defense presented evidence that Cruz suffered fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and brain impairments stemming from prenatal exposure to alcohol. Witnesses, including Cruz's half-sister and medical experts, testified about his developmental trauma and mental health diagnosis. The prosecution countered that Cruz carried out a calculated, objective massacre motivated by notoriety and hatred, calling his actions a systematic massacre designed to inflict maximum harm. On the 13th of October, 2022, a jury unanimously determined that Cruz was eligible for the death penalty, but deadlocked on imposing it, as Florida law requires unanimity. As a result, the recommendation was for life imprisonment without parole. On the 2nd of November, 2022, Judge Elizabeth Scherer formally sentenced Cruz to 34 consecutive life sentences, one for each of the 17 murders and 17 attempted murders. Florida statute mandated compliance with the jury's recommendation. There were no inconsistencies in his capture. The overwhelming evidence from surveillance recordings, eyewitness accounts, and his avoidance behavior made identification and arrest straightforward. The primary controversy centered on the failure of mental health and law enforcement systems to act on repeated warnings about Cruz's threats and psychological warning signs. In subsequent legal actions, Cruz was sued by multiple survivors and victims' families. Civil settlements were reached in 2024, including $50 million each to families of 3 deceased students, $40 million to a survivor, and a legal agreement granting survivor Anthony Borges exclusive rights to Cruz's name and likeness. These actions aimed to prevent Cruz from profiting or gaining public attention from the attack. As of May 2025, Nikolas Cruz has served 2 years and 6 months in prison. He was 19 at the time of the shooting and remains incarcerated with life without parole. No release date is set, and he will remain in prison for life. Number 8. Dimitrios Pagourtzis. On the morning of May 18, 2018, 17-year-old Dimitrios Pagourtzis entered Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, Texas, and opened fire inside the school's art complex. The attack began at approximately 7:32 a.m. and lasted several minutes. 10 people were murdered, 8 students and 2 teachers, and 13 others were injured, including a school police officer. Pagourtzis had been a junior at the school, known as a quiet student on the honor roll and a member of the football team without any prior criminal history. His family had Greek roots. His father, Antonios, had immigrated from Greece and owned 2 legally registered firearms stored at home. Pagourtzis arrived at school that morning wearing a trench coat despite the warm weather. He was armed with his father's .38 caliber revolver and a 12-gauge firearm. According to investigators and witness statements, he began the shooting in the art classroom complex. The classrooms were interconnected by interior hallways and a ceramics room. Upon spotting a student he knew, he shouted, "Surprise!" and shot the student. Witnesses stated that he deliberately shot students he disliked and spared those he liked so they could tell his story. Students who survived the attack reported that they had taken cover inside closets and behind desks. In one case, Pagourtzis fired a shotgun through the door of a storage closet where students were hiding, injuring some of them. One survivor, 15-year-old Abel San Miguel, was grazed by a bullet while hiding. He later appeared at a candlelight vigil for the victims with his wound treated by his father. Another student, 16-year-old Rome Schubert, was shot in the back of the head but survived, tweeted from his hospital stating, "I'm so grateful and blessed that God spared my life today." He said he hadn't realized he had been shot until he began running from the classroom and noticed the injury. Pagourtzis was wearing a t-shirt that said "Born to Murder" and had modified his trench coat with symbols, including the Nazi Iron Cross. Witnesses said he sang "Another One Bites the Dust" while firing his weapon. Law enforcement responded quickly. A Santa Fe ISD police officer, John Barnes, engaged the shooter and was shot in the elbow. He was hospitalized in critical condition. Pagourtzis exchanged gunfire with officers for several minutes before surrendering. According to Galveston County officials, he told investigators that he intended to shoot himself but chickened out. At the time of the shooting, he was a junior at the school. He had purchased ammunition online months before the attack using his real name and address. The purchases were made through LuckyGunner.com without verification of age. No mental health warnings or criminal history were recorded before the shooting. Texas Governor Greg Abbott stated that there were no clear red flags in his background and that Pagourtzis had not been previously identified as a threat. During the investigation, law enforcement discovered journal entries and digital communications in which he expressed a desire to carry out the attack. He admitted to deliberately targeting individuals and sparing others. When questioned by police, he repeated that he had spared students he liked so they could tell his story. Among the victims were substitute teacher Ann Perkins, art teacher Cynthia Tisdale, and students Sabika Sheikh, an exchange student from Pakistan, Chris Stone, Kim Vaughn, Angelique Ramirez, Aaron Kyle McLeod, Christian Garcia, and Shayna Fisher. Shauna Fisher's mother later alleged that her daughter had rejected Pagourtzis' romantic advances shortly before the shooting, though the defense denied this was the motive. The shooter's father told Greek media that he believed his son had been bullied and described him as a good boy who was a victim himself. Pagourtzis was charged with multiple counts of capital murder and aggravated assault against a public servant. However, in November 2019, a judge ruled that he was incompetent to stand trial due to mental illness, including diagnoses of schizophrenia and major depressive disorder. He was committed to a state mental hospital for treatment. His condition has been reviewed repeatedly since 2019, but as of March 2025, he remains declared incompetent to stand trial. In 2021, victims' families filed civil lawsuits against Pagourtzis' parents, arguing that they failed to secure their firearms and ignored signs of mental instability. In August 2024, a jury found Dimitrios Pagourtzis and Lucky Gunner, the ammunition supplier, liable, but did not find the parents legally responsible. The families were awarded over $300 million in damages, though Pagourtzis has no assets and Lucky Gunner had already settled separately. His parents were not criminally charged or disciplined beyond civil proceedings. He has been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder by treating psychiatrists. As of May 2025, he has served 7 years in a mental health facility. He remains in the custody of the Texas Department of State Health Services and continues to undergo psychiatric treatment. He has not been transferred to prison due to his continued mental incompetency and is not eligible for release. There is no scheduled trial date, and his legal case remains suspended indefinitely. Number 9. Colt Gray. On the 10th of January, 2024, 14-year-old Colt Gray opened fire at Appalachia High School in Winder, Georgia, killing 4 individuals and injuring 9 others. The shooting began shortly after 10:20 a.m. and lasted for only a few minutes before Gray surrendered to law enforcement. The victims included 2 14-year-old students, Mason Schermerhorn and Christian Angulo, and 2 teachers, Christina Ermy and Richard Aspinall. Gray was taken into custody without resistance and is being charged with 4 counts of murder. He will be tried as an adult. Gray had enrolled at Appalachia High School only 2 weeks prior. On the day of the shooting, it was his first full day attending classes. According to classmates, he displayed unusual behavior earlier that morning. In first period class, he reportedly asked how the school would respond to an active shooter. The teacher reported the comment to staff, but it did not reach the classroom where the attack began. At approximately 9:42 a.m., Gray sent a text message to his father reading, "I'm sorry, it's not her fault. You are not to blame for any of it." He then exited his algebra classroom at 9:45 a.m. without taking a hall pass. The classroom door locked behind him. Surveillance footage and witness statements later confirmed that he entered a bathroom stall, changed into yellow plastic gloves, and retrieved his weapon, concealed in a rolled-up poster board inside his backpack. At the same time, another student with a similar name was mistakenly detained by school officers during an urgent search, delaying their ability to locate Gray. Gray returned to the hallway outside his algebra classroom and knocked on the door. A student looked through the glass panel and saw that he was armed. The teacher instructed the student not to open the door. Gray then entered a neighboring classroom where the door had been left open. Witnesses say he began firing 10 to 15 rounds, immediately killing student Christian Angulo. He continued shooting while moving through the hallway, reportedly yelling for people to open doors. One teacher, Richard Aspinall, was shot in the chest after leaving his classroom to investigate the noise. His students pulled him back into the room and tried to stop the bleeding using their clothing, while others barricaded the door with desks. Another victim, teacher Christina Ermy, was also killed during the incident. Several students in nearby rooms described hearing, shouting, gunfire, and then screams. One student later stated that Gray pounded on the door and shouted, "Open up," before gunfire erupted again. The lockdown system, newly installed at the school, was triggered when multiple staff members activated panic buttons embedded in their ID badges. All digital smartboards displayed a hard lockdown message in red text, prompting students and teachers to shelter in place. Some students initially thought it was a drill until they heard live gunfire. Gray was confronted within minutes by school resource officers. According to Barrow County Sheriff Judd Smith, Gray gave up and got on the ground when confronted and was arrested without incident. He was transported to the Gainesville Regional Youth Detention Center. Following the attack, law enforcement searched Gray's home in Bethlehem, Georgia. Investigators recovered evidence suggesting he was fixated on other mass shootings, including the 2018 Parkland, Florida school shooting. They found Discord logs and online activity under a Russian username referencing Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter. Gray had been previously interviewed by the FBI in 2023 after anonymous tips were submitted about threats made online. At the time, he was 13. Both he and his father denied involvement, and authorities determined there was insufficient evidence to pursue charges. Local schools were asked to monitor him, but no further action was taken. On the morning of the shooting, Gray's mother reportedly called the school warning of an extreme emergency and urged administrators to locate her son. However, due to the earlier confusion with the similarly named student, Gray was not found in time. His family has publicly stated that Gray was dealing with personal issues and had been exposed to distressing content online. His aunt posted on social media defending him, suggesting he was a victim of his environment. Those comments were later deleted following backlash from the community and the victims' families. Among the victims was one 4-year-old Mason Schermerhorn, an autistic student. His family had been trying to reach him during the attack and later confirmed his death. Hundreds of people attended a vigil in downtown Winder following the incident. Tributes poured in for the victims, while several parents expressed frustration at the ongoing problem of school shootings in the U.S. Gray was charged with 4 counts of murder and multiple counts of aggravated assault. Despite his age, the court ruled that he would be tried as an adult. During his preliminary hearings, the prosecution cited premeditation, evidence of intent, and previous warnings as justification for adult charges. The defense requested mental health evaluations and argued that he had been subject to bullying and trauma, but the judge found sufficient cause to proceed under adult court jurisdiction. As of March 2025, Colt Gray remains in custody at a secure juvenile facility in Georgia while awaiting trial. He has undergone multiple psychological assessments and has been declared competent to stand trial. No official trial date has been announced, but legal proceedings are expected to begin in late 2025. If convicted, Gray faces the possibility of life imprisonment. He was 14 years old at the time of the attack. He has served 1 year and 4 months in custody as of May 2025. Number 10. Seung Hui Cho. Seung Hui Cho was 23 years old when he committed one of the deadliest mass shootings in United States history. The incident took place at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, commonly known as Virginia Tech, on the 16th of April, 2007. The attack occurred in 2 separate locations: West Ambler Johnston Hall, a student dormitory, and Norris Hall, an academic building on the opposite side of the campus. In total, Cho murdered 32 people, 5 faculty members and 27 students, before dying by hurting himself inside a classroom. Cho was a senior English major at Virginia Tech and a South Korean national with permanent resident status in the United States. His behavioral and psychological history was complex. Diagnosed with severe depression and selective mutism in adolescence, Cho had been ordered by a Virginia special justice in 2005 to receive outpatient mental health treatment. Despite this legal order, he was never institutionalized nor entered into the federal database that would have barred him from purchasing firearms. He obtained both a Walther P-22 and a Glock 19 firearm legally in the months prior to the shooting. At around 7:15 a.m., Cho entered West Ambler Johnston Hall. Surveillance footage later captured him near the entrance before he proceeded to the dorm room of Emily Hilscher, a 19-year-old student from Woodville, Virginia. He shot her shortly after entering. Hearing the commotion, Ryan Clark, a 22-year-old resident assistant, came to investigate and was also fatally shot. Cho then returned to his room in Harper Hall, changed out of his clothes, deleted his emails, and removed his computer's hard drive. Approximately 2 hours after the first attack, he mailed a package containing photos, writings, and video recordings to NBC News. The package was postmarked at 9:01 a.m. At 9:40 a.m., Cho entered Norris Hall. He had chained all 3 main entrances shut and placed a note on one door, falsely warning of a bomb if anyone attempted to open it. Inside a backpack, Cho carried multiple magazines, 2 handguns, chains, locks, and nearly 400 rounds of ammunition. He began shooting in room 206, where Professor G.V. Loganathan was teaching an advanced hydrology engineering class. Loganathan was the first to be shot and murdered in the building. Cho murdered 9 of the 13 students in the room and wounded 2 more. He continued into rooms 204, 207, and 211, moving methodically between classrooms. Eyewitnesses described how he would shoot into a room from the hallway, then enter and walk down aisles firing at close range. Professor Liviu Librescu, a Holocaust survivor, held the door of room 204 closed long enough for most of his students to escape through windows. He was eventually shot through the door. In room 211, French professor Jocelyn Couture-Nowak and student Henry Lee attempted to barricade the door with desks before being shot. Matthew Laporte, an Air Force ROTC cadet, tried to tackle Cho and was fatally shot 7 times. Cho returned to previously attacked classrooms multiple times, attempting to fire at survivors or anyone tending to the wounded. In some cases, students who played dead managed to survive. In room 205, a substitute professor and students successfully barricaded the door with a table. Although Cho shot through it multiple times, no one in the room was harmed. Police were notified by 9:42 a.m. and entered Norris Hall 10 minutes later by shooting through a locked entrance. As they advanced to the second floor, Cho shot himself in room 211 using his Glock 19. Officers found him dead with his weapons and multiple unused rounds beside him. In total, 174 rounds had been fired during the attack. 17 individuals were wounded by gunfire, and 6 more sustained injuries while escaping through windows. Seung Hui Cho left behind a manifesto and 27 video clips in the package he sent to NBC News, claiming to speak on behalf of the weak and the humiliated. He likened himself to Jesus Christ and referenced the Columbine shooters as martyrs. In one clip he stated, "You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. I had to do it." He expressed resentment toward affluent students and accused society of tormenting him. Investigators later found these materials to be emotionally unbalanced and filled with delusional grievances. There were no formal charges, no legal proceedings, and no opportunity for him to offer a defense in court. As such, there was no prison assignment, no appeals, and no discharge procedures. He was never incarcerated or convicted of any crime. Following the incident, investigators focused on Cho's mental health background and Virginia Tech's failure to identify and act on warning signs. The Virginia Tech Review Panel criticized the university and mental health system for missed intervention opportunities. It noted that Cho's previous involuntary outpatient order was not communicated in a way that would have prevented him from purchasing firearms under the then current law. As of March 2025, Seung Hui Cho remains deceased. He served 0 years in prison and was never sentenced. His final act occurred in room 211 of Norris Hall, where he died before law enforcement made contact. Thank you guys for watching. Is it appropriate for parents to buy firearms for their children? Kindly share your opinion below.